Call the honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I move that so much of standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the Honourable Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion immediately. 1. That this House censures the Prime Minister for repeatedly and deliberately misleading the Parliament and the Australian people by A. Promising no cuts to the ABC or SBS, but cutting over $500 million and at least 400 jobs from these organisations. B. Promising before the election no cuts to education and no cuts to health, but cutting $80 billion from schools and hospitals. C. Promising before the election no cuts to education, but cutting more than $5.8 billion from our universities, meaning Australian students will pay more than $100,000 for a degree. D. Promising before the election no cuts to health, but hitting Australians with a GP tax every time they visit the doctor. E. Promising no changes to pensions, but cutting $450 million from pension indexation. F. Promising no change to the GST for blackmailing states and territories to make the case for him. G. Promising to build submarines in Australia, but going back on this promise. H. Promising no new or increased taxes, but ambushing the Australian people with a $2.2 billion petrol tax. And 2. For his dishonest and unfair budget, which is hurting Australians. The Prime Minister stared down the barrel of the camera the night before the election and he promised no cuts to education, no cuts to health, no change to pensions, no change to the GST and no cuts to the ABC or SBS. This is why we must suspend standing orders. Question after question in this parliament today, the words of the Prime Minister were put back to him. And did he have the honesty to say, "I said this"? Not at all. Instead, he ran all sorts of disingenuous, dishonest offences. He said he promised no special treatment. Well, actually, he did.
That's right.
He said
exactly right.
No cuts to ABC, no cuts to SBS. We did not make him say that script. I'm sure there are now ministers in the government slapping their hands over their foreheads, saying, what on earth was the Prime Minister thinking? But this is a Prime Minister who was adrift in terms of his own policy. He has no regulators or brakes in terms of what he says and when he says it. He promised no cuts to education, no cuts to health, no changes to pension, no change to GST and no cuts to the ABC or SBS. On the ABC, this is why we should suspend standing orders. He's cutting half $1 billion. Now this Prime Minister says, oh, it's just waste. How dare this man say to 400 people that you are just a waste? How dare he say, as he shuts down the ABC radio in Morwell, that is just a waste, and in Gladstone and in Nowra. This is a Prime Minister who doesn't know the value of the people who work for the public service of Australia. He's taken over $45 million as a down payment out of radio, out of the Australian network, and then he sent Malcolm Turnbull, a man who spent his adult political life trying to pretend he's different to Tony Abbott. He spent his adult life saying he is different. Now, what I believe when Minister actions speak louder than words for Malcolm Turnbull, but what we see with the ABC is that the Prime Minister is engaging in an extremist, ruthless, right-wing campaign to silence the ABC.
The member for Lawler will go back to her seat
is this
or
is a government
silent.
and this is a Prime Minister who has no integrity when it comes to keeping his commitments to the Australian people. The reason why we censure this Prime Minister and believe that standing orders should be suspended is because it's not just about the cuts to the ABC. What he is seeking to do is lay waste to the moral basis of pluralism and democracy in this country. He is a narrow man. He is a narrow man, and he has no ideology other than extremism. Look at what they seek to do to our hospitals. In the budget, the document that dare not speak its name, the document which has effectively destroyed the authority of the Treasurer in this parliament for once and for all. They say there are no cuts to hospitals. No cuts to hospitals. But when you study their budget documents, it clearly shows that there are massive cuts coming to hospitals. In the state of Victoria, which Tony Abbott has now excised from the Australian Commonwealth, that is why he sends his foreign minister to visit at Victoria. And of course he has his poor old beleaguered Victorian MPs. They love the petrol tax 3 weeks out from the Victorian election. Another gift from a foreign nation called Tony Abbott.
She's cheering for it.
What they are doing is they are going to cut $13 billion from hospitals. That's right, $13 billion from the hospitals of Victoria over the next 10 years. Shame, Liberal, shame. And then we look at the schools. Before the last election, the Prime Minister says no cuts. They send out the petition meister, the Education Minister. I tell you what, if you ever need a Cabinet Minister, don't ring him, but if you want an ineffective petition, Christopher Pyne is your man. He's actually hilarious if he wasn't a Cabinet Minister. The issue is they're going to cut billions from schools. This is a government who is adrift. They have no domestic policy. The budget indicates their failure to have a plan for Australia. There is no future plan for Australia under this government. They say before the election they support needs-based funding. They say before the election these are the best friends of public schools we'll ever see. But then once they get elected, they break their promise. But it doesn't just stop at hospitals and it doesn't just stop at schools. How about the submarines promise? Who knows what deal this Prime Minister has done with the Prime Minister of Japan and the Americans not to build submarines in Australia? That will come out. But he promised, the Prime Minister promised. It doesn't matter what the shouting from the beleaguered backbench of the government do. They know, late at night, when they pull the doona over their head, they know, in that fearful part of their heart, they know that the Prime Minister has led them into a colossal disaster. Right. Why on earth did the Prime Minister lie? This is a Prime Minister who made his reputation more than any other figure in modern Australian politics. When he tried to crucify Julia Gillard, he said he wouldn't break his promises. But then what they did, what they did now is there is no Prime Minister who has ever broken so many promises. Look at this smirking fellow. He's so happy with himself. He doesn't. What did he say today? I didn't say there'd be special treatment. He's attacked the media, the ABC, for being wasteful. Who are you to defame so many people in our public broadcast? But it's not just the submarines. What about the petrol tax? How many Victorian MPs have asked Tony Abbott to come and open their launches in this state campaign? How many? If there is more than none, I will be amazed. But it's not just that. Then we look at the GST. This is a Prime Minister who has turned his back on all his own views and battle lines and believing in a strong national government. He is disowning the functions of the federal government. He's turning back on 50 years of cooperative federalism, and he is saying we are going to cut and cut and cut the funding to the states to force them to have a GST debate. This is a Prime Minister who doesn't have the courage to advocate his own reforms. I would have more respect, not for his ideology, but for his policy courage, if he would come out and advocate a GST, because that's what he thinks. And Australia knows what he thinks. And then, of course, we get to arguably the greatest travesty of this government, the attack on the hopes and dreams of millions of Australian students and their families. They want to create a two-class Australia and a two-tier education system. What they wish to do to higher education is disgraceful. A 20% cut to the funding of universities, doubling the bond rate of the repayment debts of students who go to university. Listen to the silence now. It speaks volumes. Even those opposite know the truth. So this is a government who deserves to be held to account, and this is why standing orders should be suspended. No cuts to pensions, no cuts to the ABC or SBS, no cuts to hospitals or education, no changes to taxes. This is a government who not only lies to the Australian people, who cheated their way into the election by lying to the Australian people, they now lie about lying. Shame, Prime Minister, shame.